North Dakota has been extremely patient and very much appreciative of his willingness to allow me to speak.
I'd like to thank the senator from Michigan, and I actually am going to yield to the good senator from South Dakota. I know he has a commitment, and he will be brief, and so I will yield to my colleague from South Dakota.
Mr. President, thank you.
Senator from North Dakota.
Thank you,
North
Mr.
Dakota
President.
to South Dakota.
I know it's very confusing, and I very much appreciate my colleague from North Dakota yielding to his colleague from the South. I had hoped to come down here to ask unanimous consent to call up and pass Senate Bill 1956 with a committee-reported amendment. My understanding is there is an objection on the other side. I'm disappointed about that. I'd hope that we'd be able to get unanimous consent today to pass what is a very bipartisan bill. It's the European Union Emission Trading Scheme Prohibition Act. It's a bill that passed by voice vote just this week I should say, earlier this week from the Commerce Committee, and a similar measure was passed earlier this year in the House of Representatives by a voice vote. The aviation industry, the administration, consumers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, just about everyone believes that the EU must be reined in and it must happen quickly. In fact, just this week at the Commerce Committee markup, Senator Boxer, who's the chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, also a member of the Commerce Committee, said, and I quote, "I think moving it," referring to my bill, is critical, and moving it fast is critical, because I think it will send a message to the international organization we are trying to nudge forward to know that this is the way that this is going to be dealt with, end quote. I could not agree more, Mr. President. In 2005, the European Union began their emissions trading scheme, which attempts to cap emissions of carbon dioxide from stationary sources within the European Union. Starting in 2012, in January of this year, civil aviation operators departing from or landing in Europe began to be included in this emission scheme. Now, under this program, any airline, including non-European airlines flying into and out of Europe, will be required to pay for EU emission allowances. Allowances will be collected for the entirety of the flight, including portions in U.S. and international airspace. Now, just as a great example of this unfair application is happening right now, is we've got Olympic athletes that are traveling to and from the London Games by air. One such Olympian is from my home state of South Dakota, Paige McPherson. She's competing in Taekwondo next week. She arrived in London last week, and the final leg of her flight took her from Newark Airport to Heathrow Airport. During this flight, approximately 555 miles of the 3,500 miles flown, or 16%, were actually in EU airspace. But her flight was taxed as if 100% of it was in EU airspace. Now, obviously, this unilateral imposition of the EU ETS on U.S. aviation operators is arbitrary, it is unfair, and it is a clear violation of international law. Plus, it is being done without any guarantee for environmental improvements and at a huge cost to the aviation industry and constituents that we serve. Now, let me be clear that no one in Congress is against the EU implementing this European trading scheme within their boundaries. That's obviously their prerogative, that's their jurisdiction. However, Mr. President, I believe that any system that includes international and other non-EU airspace must be addressed through the International Civil Aviation Organization, otherwise known as ICAO, of which the United States and 190 countries, including all of the EU member states, are members. And that's why I introduced this simple bipartisan bill. It gives the Secretary of Transportation the authority to take the necessary steps to ensure America's aviation operators are not penalized by any system unilaterally imposed by the European Union. The bill also requires the Secretary of Transportation, the Administrator of the FAA, and other senior U.S. officials to use their authority to conduct international negotiations and take other actions necessary to ensure that U.S. operators are held harmless from the actions of the European Union. It is time for the United States Senate to join the House of Representatives and the administration in voicing our strong opposition to application of the European Union's emission trading scheme system to American operators. I'm sorry that it couldn't be done today, Mr. President, because, as I said, this was unanimously reported out of the Commerce Committee earlier this week. We had broad bipartisan support. Democrats and Republicans agree this is an issue that needs to be addressed, And frankly, it's one that I think could be addressed in a very timely way. The longer we wait, the longer that we have American air carriers and therefore American travelers paying into a system that there is no guarantee is going to be used for any kind of environmental improvements in Europe. It's in effect a tax on American travelers that would fund European governments, and if you want to put it in a very crass, plain way, you could say that the American public is being taxed to bail out European Union nations. That's as simply as I can put this. It is a violation of international law. It is a violation of American sovereignty. It is an unfair, unjust, and illegal tax. It needs to be stopped. This legislation would allow that to happen, and it's unfortunate that we've got an objection on the other side that will prevent that from happening here tonight. But I intend to work with my colleagues to try and get a vote on this as soon as we return in September. And I want to thank again my colleague from North Dakota for his graciousness in allowing me to make that statement. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, does the gentleman from North Dakota have the floor?
Mr. President, I do. I'd rise on another issue, but I would yield at least temporarily to see what the good senator from Missouri...
Well, I just am concerned that we're going to go home without an ag disaster bill that farm families can rely on. I've got some remarks here that I'd like to insert into the record, but I'd also say that this disaster is real. The disaster programs for livestock ran out a year ago, by September the 30th of last year. We have a chance to do something. I'm fine. We have a chance to do something about that, and I'd like to see us do something about that. The idea that we would decide that we can put this off another month, that we can put those families in jeopardy for another month of not knowing what their solution is, just seems to me to be totally unacceptable, Mr. President, and I would yield the floor back to my friend from North Dakota, but I have some remarks for the record and intend to continue to do everything I can to see that we solve this problem with a real solution, not just another Washington excuse as to why we can't do what needs to be done, and I'd yield back.
I'd like to thank my esteemed colleague from the senator from Missouri. I appreciate working with him on many issues, including agriculture, and I share his concern. I've been on the floor of the Senate this weekend and past weeks expressing my desire to pass a farm bill, including drought assistance. I believe we can do that. We've passed a farm bill here in the Senate. The House Ag Committee's come forward with a product. We absolutely need to come together, House and Senate, on farm bill for the good of our farmers and ranchers, including drought assistance, and for the good of the country. I rise today to introduce legislation on another matter, important energy legislation for our country. I am today introducing the Hoven, Conrad, Bacchus Coal Ash Recycling and Oversight Act of 2012. In my home state of North Dakota, there's a large power plant just north of the state capital, Bismarck. It's the Coal Creek Power Station. Now, this power station generates 1,100 megawatts of electricity every year. There's two 550-megawatt plants. It's got the latest, greatest technology, emission controls, clean coal technology. They do things like they capture the steam that was formerly exhausted from the plant. They capture that steam and they actually use it to run an ethanol plant. So they produce transportation fuel with steam, a byproduct of the electric generation process. One of the other things they do is they also, instead of landfilling the coal ash or fly ash, the coal residuals, instead of just landfilling that coal ash, they recycle. So in essence, they take that coal ash, they work with a natural resources company, Headwaters, which is based out of Utah, and they turn the coal ash into a concrete product. It's called Flexcrete. It's actually a stronger concrete product, and they use it to make roads and bridges and buildings, also products like shingles. So building materials. So whereas they used to take about 600,000 tons a year of coal residuals and coal ash, fly ash, and just landfill it, and it cost, I don't know, $6 a ton or so to landfill it. Now they take that 600,000 tons a year of fly ash and residuals, turn it into building products. So the difference, instead of paying to dispose of something and now being paid to recycle something, is about a $16 million a year revenue item for that plant. That means lower cost electricity for businesses in states like the great state of North Dakota and, in fact, the great state of Minnesota and other states as well. So it truly benefits our consumers, our families, it benefits our economy, and benefits small business throughout the upper Midwest. So it's truly a great example of American ingenuity and innovation. In fact, I've got a picture right here. This is the North Dakota Heritage Center. Right now there's a $50 million expansion being constructed to that Heritage Center, which is located on the Capitol grounds in Bismarck. $50 million expansion. They're using building materials made of coal ash for this facility. And that's what it's going to look like after they do this $50 million expansion. Let me give you another example. This is the National Energy Center of Excellence at Bismarck State College, two-year college that trains people for the energy industry. It's located right above the Missouri River. This beautiful window overlooks the Missouri River. Again, a building constructed with building materials made of fly ash. So you can see how this product is used and how effective it is being used. As a matter of fact, if you look nationwide, by recycling coal ash, we reduce energy consumption by 162 trillion BTUs every year. Now that's the amount of energy that you would use to power 1.7 million homes in a year. Pretty substantial energy savings. Or measure it in terms of water use. We reduce water use by recycling coal ash. We reduce water usage by 32 billion gallons annually. That's about 1/3 of the total amount of water that the state of California uses in a year. So why do I tell the story? Because right now EPA is looking at changing the regulations of coal ash. They're looking at changing the regulation of coal ash to doing it under Subtitle C of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. The problem is that's the hazardous waste section. Right now, coal ash is regulated under Subtitle D of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which is the non-hazardous waste section. And EPA is looking at making that change in spite of the fact that the Department of Energy, the Federal Highway Administration, state regulatory agencies, and the EPA itself have done studies, and those studies have shown that it is not a toxic waste. So now the EPA first proposed this new regulation in June of 2010. This regulation would truly undermine the industry, drive up costs, and eliminate jobs when our economy can least afford it. In fact, according to industry estimates, it would increase electricity costs by up to almost $50 billion annually and eliminate 300,000 American jobs. Let me elaborate. Meeting the regulatory disposal requirements under the EPA's Subtitle C proposal would cost between $250 and $450 per ton, as opposed to about $100 per ton under the current system, which would translate into $47 billion in terms of burden on electricity generators that use coal, and of course, most importantly, their customers who would see their bills increased. And as I said, overall it would cost about 300,000 American jobs for our economy. That is why I'm introducing the Hoeven-Conrad-Baucus Coal Ash Recycling and Oversight Act, which is Senate 1751, and it has very strong bipartisan support. It is truly a bipartisan bill, including 12 Republican sponsors and 12 Democrat sponsors. The Republican sponsors include myself, Senator McConnell, Senator Portman, Senator Bozeman, Senator Blunt, Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Moran, Senator Alexander, Senator Toomey, Senator Grand, Senator Thune, and Senator Hatch. The Democrat co-sponsors include Senator Conrad, Senator Baucus, Senator Cole, Senator Landrieu, Senator Manchin, Senator Warner, Senator Pryor, Senator McCaskill, Senator Ben Nelson, Senator Bill Nelson, Senator Casey, and Senator Webb. And I want to thank them for their willingness to join together in a bipartisan way. 12 Republicans, 12 Democrats come together to provide the kind of energy legislation that's going to truly help move this country forward, empower not only more energy development, but better environmental stewardship. This legislation, which is similar to H.R. 2273, which was sponsored by David McKinley, Representative David McKinley of West Virginia in the House, passed the House with strong bipartisan support. And this legislation is very similar. We've made some enhancements, but it's very similar. The bill not only preserves coal ash recycling by preventing these byproducts from being treated as hazardous, it also establishes, this is important because this is about good environmental stewardship, it also establishes comprehensive federal standards for coal ash disposal. Under this legislation, states can set up their own permitting program for the management and the disposal of coal ash. These programs would be required to be based on existing EPA regulations to protect human health and the environment. If a state does not implement an acceptable permitting program, then EPA regulates the program for the state. As a result, states and industry will know where they stand under the bill, since the benchmarks for what constitutes a successful state program will be set in statute. EPA can say, yes, the state does meet those standards, or no, it does not. But the EPA cannot move the goalposts. This is a states-first approach that provides regulatory certainty. I want to repeat that. This is a states-first approach that provides regulatory certainty, and it's that regulatory certainty we need to stimulate private investment that will deploy the new technologies that will not only produce more energy, but will produce better environmental stewardship. And what is certain is that under this bill, coal ash disposal sites will be required to meet established standards. Those established standards include groundwater detection and monitoring, liners, corrective action when environmental damage occurs, structural stability criteria, and the financial assurance and record-keeping needed to protect the public. Mr. President, this is legislation that is needed to protect jobs and help reduce the cost of homes, of roads, and to help reduce electric bills. I want to thank both the Republicans and the Democrats who have taken a leadership role in this effort as original sponsors of the legislation. Especially want to express thanks to my fellow senator from North Dakota, Senator Conrad, also Senator Baucus of Montana, and their staffs for the hard work that has gone into this legislation, and urge our colleagues to join us in this important energy legislation. Thank you, Mr. President, and I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it was reported today that Iraq has denied the United States' request to extradite senior Hezbollah field commander Ali Musa Dakdouk, who was recently ordered released by the Iraqi court after our government turned him over to Iraqi custody when our troops left the country. The administration had years to transfer Dakdouk to our detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, but because the President seemed to lack the political will, I think because of campaign promises he improvidently made, one of our most dangerous, reprehensible terrorists in our custody will likely be allowed to go free. We should never be in this position. I and others saw this coming, and we pleaded with the administration not to allow it to happen. Sadly, our warnings fell on deaf ears, and sadly, we were proven correct. Dakdouk is responsible for the torture and murder of 5 American servicemen in Karbala, Iraq, including Private Jonathan Milligan of Locust Fork, Alabama, who was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action as he attempted to defend his comrades in this attack. Dakdouk's actions were terrorist actions outside the rules of war. They were wearing American uniforms, an action that he directed. They are against the laws of war, and he's not only to be held and can be held not only as a prisoner of war, but as a violator of the rules of war, could be tried and should have been tried in American military commission. When U.S. forces captured Dakdouk, then the most senior Hezbollah figure in U.S. custody, he provided detailed testimony about the support and training provided by Iran to Iraqi insurgents, and he admitted it violating the rules of war. He is not a criminal defendant. He's not a member of an organized crime syndicate or some drug dealer. He is a confessed terrorist who committed atrocities against American soldiers during a war duly authorized by Congress, and that makes him an enemy unlawful combatant who may be detained until the conclusion of the war or subjected to trial by military commission. And he could be imprisoned for up to life, or he could be executed. Once the military determined he was no longer of use for intelligence purposes when he was in Iraq, he should have been brought to Guantanamo Bay. That was a perfect place for him to be detained. This should have been an open and shut case. But President Obama and Attorney General Holder have obstinately clung to the failed law enforcement approach to counterterrorism. They just have. It's been a dispute all the way through the campaign and since they've taken office. They believe in treating foreign enemy combatants as normal criminal defendants entitled to U.S. constitutional protections and civilian trials. This is contrary to history, contrary to the laws of war, contrary to our treaty obligations. The other nations don't do this. The problem began when, upon taking office, the President decided to ban any new additions to the prisoner population at Guantanamo Bay. You remember that. He didn't like Guantanamo Bay. He thought that was some bad place. So if he transferred Dakdouk, or anyone else for that matter, to Gitmo, he would anger certain of his supporters and violate some of his improvident campaign promises. One of which was to the effect Gitmo was a cause of terrorism, not a way to prevent terrorism and prevent people from murdering people. So when the reports surfaced that the administration planned to transfer Dakdouk to the United States for a civilian trial, that was the first report. He would be brought to the civilian trial. My colleagues and I wrote the Attorney General and urging him to reconsider and try him through military commission. And for a time, the Attorney General appeared to have relented. But a few months later, it was reported that instead of transferring him to Gitmo, the administration decided to release Dakdouk to Iraqi custody. This time, we wrote to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Panetta, asking him to reconsider that decision. We warned that the Iraqi government previously had released terrorists who later returned to the battlefield to kill American servicemen. Yet, as the deadline for the United States withdrawal from Iraq approached, it became clear that the President had no intention of removing Dr. Duke from Iraq. The President then struck a deal with Prime Minister al-Maliki to charge Dr. Duke before an Iraqi criminal court for his acts of terrorism, forgery, and illegal entry, and other offenses. Now that the Iraqi court has had the hearing and trial, they've ordered him released, in spite of the volume of evidence turned over by the United States to be used in the trial, including his uncoerced confessions detailing his role in training the insurgents and his role in the Karbala massacre that I've referred to. It appears that it is only a matter of time before he will now be set free. Recent press reports indicate that the Iraqi authorities are trying to find a way to release Dr. Duke without angering the White House or embarrassing the President ahead of the elections. Well, no one should be surprised that Iraq will not turn him over. This was our concern from the beginning. This kind of thing would happen. The administration knew well before it handed over Dr. Duke that its decision was an abdication of its responsibility to prosecute a terrorist for war crimes against American soldiers, the murder of American soldiers. The administration knew that if the Iraqi courts failed to bring him to justice, we may never get a second chance. That was known. And they knew that Iraq would not agree to an extradition request. That's been their policy. So the fact of the matter is we wouldn't be in this position if we just prosecuted Dr. Duke when we had the opportunity. But now, not only is justice perverted, but he could be returned to the battlefield to kill further Americans, Iraqis, and others. Unfortunately, Dr. Duke was not the first, nor will he be the last example of this administration's unwillingness to confront dangerous terrorists effectively and to process them effectively. In July of 2009, Senator John Kyle and I wrote President Obama urging him to adhere to this nation's long-standing policy of not negotiating with terrorists and not to release the Khazali brothers, two of the top Iraqi terrorists trained by Dr. Duke, who were complicit in the Karbala massacre, 2009. But they went forward in exchange for the release of British hostages held by the terrorist organization called the League of the Righteous. President Obama authorized the Khazalis' release as part of what the Iraqi government called its reconciliation efforts with insurgent groups. But in reality, this release was a thinly veiled ploy to use Iraq as a middleman in a terrorist for hostage exchange in direct violation of President Reagan's policy, not to negotiate with terrorists. In fact, the executive order he issued to that effect. When Iraq released the Khazalis to the League of the Righteous, the terrorist group responded by releasing 5 British hostages. But sadly, 4 of them had already been executed. And Qais Khazali, immediately upon his release, resumed his position as leader of the terrorist group and orchestrated the kidnapping of the U.S. civilian contractor in Baghdad, less than a month after his release. And Abdul Reza Shali, an Iranian Quds Force officer, now in Iraq. You know, the Quds Force is one of the most loyal and vicious parts of the Iranian regime. This Quds officer had helped the Khazali and Dr. Duke plan the Karbala massacre. and helped coordinate the attempt to assassinate the Saudi Arabian ambassador on United States soil. You remember that? That's the same guy. Despite this alarming track record and the obvious lessons to be learned from its previous mistakes, the administration recently insisted on engaging in negotiations with the Taliban to release 5 terrorist detainees from Guantanamo Bay. Detainees who were categorized as previously as too dangerous to transfer by the administration's own committee, the Guantanamo Review Task Force, and that they were to be released in exchange for the Taliban's promise in Afghanistan to, quote, begin talks with the Afghan government. Negotiating, I suggest, with terrorists is not a profitable enterprise, and that's what that, in effect, was. The 3 of these, of the 5, have ties to al-Qaeda. Another met with Iranian officials on behalf of the Taliban immediately following 9/11 to discuss Iran's offer of weapons and support to attack U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Another detainee then under consideration, Mohammed Fazl, is a close friend of the Supreme Taliban commander Mullah Omar, accused of killing thousands of Afghan Shiites and who was responsible for the prison revolt that claimed the life of CIA officer Johnny Michael Spann, the first American killed in Afghanistan, and incidentally another brave Alabamian. As time has passed, it has become clear that the policy of not negotiating with terrorists is sound and essential, and that the administration's actions in violation of that policy have failed and they're dangerous. Indeed, the administration's failed terrorist detention policies appear to have led to a policy that favors killing rather than capture and interrogation of enemy combatants. It's an odd event, but it does appear to have some truth to it. So today we face a situation in Afghanistan that is similar to that we faced in Iraq in 2009. Parwan Prison currently houses roughly 2,000 to 3,000 individuals, including high-value detainees. In August 2011, the Washington Post, last August, reported that, quote, U.S. officials say that giving Afghans control over the fates of the suspected insurgents would allow dangerous Taliban fighters to slip through the cracks of an undeveloped legal system, close quote. I'll tell you what that means. It means they won't be able to keep them in those jails. History shows that. They will get their way out of there through violence, through bribery, through threats, or some other mechanism. And that's what's continuing to happen. It's a big concern of the military, and as a federal prosecutor who observed this particular issue over the years in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's been a source of concern to me. In March of this year, the administration agreed to a gradual transfer of control of the prison to the Afghan government over a period of 6 months, with the United States holding veto power over the release of certain prisoners. However, the Washington Post reported in May, just May this year, that the administration has been secretly releasing high-value detainees held in Afghanistan in exchange for certain promises of support from leaders of insurgent groups. Now, how long do you think that will last? Once you release the prisoners, they're out. But the promises by some Taliban or some terrorists are not going to be honored. Not only do some of these prisoners have ties to Iran or al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations that continue to attack our troops, but their release is not even conditioned on them severing their contacts with the insurgent groups. According to the Washington Post, the administration has approved these releases in part because they do not require congressional approval. That's what they report. It also has been reported that the administration is attempting to repatriate some of the 50 most dangerous militants over which the United States currently retains custody, to release them to Pakistan and other Arab countries. This in the face of reports from the Director of National Intelligence that nearly 28% of the former Gitmo detainees are either confirmed or suspected to have returned to the battlefield to attack America and our allies. That's 28%. How many are doing so, and that we haven't yet proven that have been in the game? I suspect many more than that 28%. So the question inevitably arises when American detention operations in Afghanistan come to an end, where will the administration take those 50 or so dangerous prisoners? Assuming it hasn't already negotiated with other insurgent groups for their release. If they're not going to release them, what are they going to do with them? Once again, the administration has kicked the can down the road, just as it did in Iraq, which eventually culminated in the Doc 2 mess. The country cannot afford to continue down this dangerous path, especially in light of the impending withdrawal of our troops from Afghanistan and the administration's agreement to transfer detainees in United States custody to the Kabul government. The same unacceptable result will surely occur. The President is the Commander-in-Chief. He has serious responsibilities, and one is to defend the honor, the dignity, the credibility of the United States. I don't believe we're doing so when we're dealing with terrorists who double-cross us at every hand. He has a duty to those magnificent troops who have answered his call to go into harm's way to execute United States policy. Part of that duty is not to give away what they fought and bled for, not to give it away after they fought and bled for it and captured these people. That includes not giving up prisoners that they have, these soldiers have, at great risk and effort, captured. Terrorists who seek to destroy what we have, terrorists who we have worked so hard to capture. Terrorists who may return to kill more Americans and more Afghans. This policy cannot be defended. It's got to end. So I urge the President and his team to act forcefully now. It may not be too late. With a strong action, it may be able to ensure that Doc 2 is not released, and that he is able to be tried for the murders that he committed and the American soldiers that he killed. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I thank the Chair. Would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
objection.
I'd ask consent that I be allowed to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Georgia Peanut Commission. In 1961, Georgia's peanut farmers came together to form a commission that would promote their industry, perform research, educate the community, and conduct outreach around the state. Thus, the Georgia Peanut Commission was born. We've come a long way since 1961. As we celebrate this 50th anniversary, it is important to note that Georgia peanut farmers in 1961 harvested 475,000 acres of peanuts with an average yield of 1,200 pounds per acre. But thanks to the evolution of technology and techniques and the hard work and the innovation of Georgia's peanut farmers in 2011 in Georgia harvested the same amount of land with a yield of more than 3,500 pounds per acre. Agriculture producers face a combination of challenges, including unpredictable weather and market volatility, that determine profit or loss in any given year. Through the Georgia Peanut Commission, Georgia peanut farmers have persevered through the hardships. Now Georgia leads the nation in peanut production, producing nearly 50% of our nation's annual crop. Anyone who has ever stopped by a Georgia congressional office on Capitol Hill and taste-tested the complimentary peanuts we offer can thank the Georgia Peanut Commission. Those little red bags are recognized by hungry constituents and staffers alike as a symbol of Georgia agriculture. Annually, the Commission distributes 2 million of those little red bags. The peanut industry is vital to Georgia's economy, contributing some $2 billion annually and creating nearly 50,000 jobs across the sector. In the past 50 years, peanut farmers, with the help of the Commission, have reduced production costs through research and have worked to stimulate and increase consumption. Last year, the Georgia Peanut Commission broke ground at the site for its new headquarters in Tifton, Georgia, which will be the first net zero energy building affiliated with state government in Georgia. There are many changes happening in rural America, and the facade of these rural towns may look different year after year. But the challenges confronting our small towns and communities haven't changed. The Georgia Peanut Commission has been critical to the foundation of not just rural Georgia, but our entire state's economy. I'm proud to recognize the work that the Georgia Peanut Commission has done for our state, and congratulations to them on their 50th anniversary. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.